What's going on, guys? I sat down at this chair today in my office and thought, I want to give something back. I want to reward the people that have chosen Carrot Corner as their place to learn the game. And I want to give you a valuable lesson in poker by teaching you one skill that will single-handedly transform your win rate. I'm not saying that if your game is terrible, that this one skill, getting better at it, will make you a winning player immediately. But if you have to get good at one thing, this week, this month, this year, definitely prioritize this. I want you guys to work on your understanding of true EV. Now this may sound like hocus pocus, like what the hell is true EV? What is Pete talking about here? What I mean by this is your EV of your hand taking an action with your hand in reality against the range of your opponent in reality. A lot of people have learned like what the EV of plays is in a solver, what solver would do, how often it would bet a certain hand on the flop, that sort of thing. That's not really important. That's missing the point. What determines how many dollars you take home each year from the poker table or lose at the poker table, God forbid, is your understanding of true EV. Knowing what the highest EV play is going to be and why. Because I'm going to let you into a little secret here. The EV of your options in reality is almost never the same. So even though solvers say that you're indifferent between option A and option B really frequently, and they say, okay, just mix bluff here, mix this size and this size, sometimes check, sometimes bet, sometimes check raise, sometimes check call, and not all spots are like that. Some spots they do have a clear preference. But in the real world, it's very likely that the way your opponent is playing makes one play better, and in many cases much better than the rest. Which play is that? How do we find out? How do we think about true EV? How do I take a baseline that I know from understanding solvers and game theory and work out the true EV by combining that with what I know about how people play? That's what we're about to do. Let's jump in, let's do it. Let me show you how this works in action. I'm going to focus on every spot that comes up today. I'm going to play one table. I'm going to be super deliberate. So here we have a blue tag already. When this table gets dealt to us, our EV is higher than normal for every hand in our range, apart from the ones we just have to fold pre. So we open ace-jack off here. The true EV of this is going to be something similar to the theoretical EV. I would hope it's higher. The reason for this is that Berbatron in the big blind is a player I don't know, and many of the players I don't know will turn out to be recreational players. No offense to you, Berbatron, if you're watching this and you're not. In game theory, betting and checking this flop are the same EV. However, I think people may make more mistakes against check than against bet here. I think when you bet a monotone board, it's usually quite easy to play well against that, but when you check, it's much harder. But now my opponent's range is going to be 2-capped on average. They will not be finding enough check call here. So even though my hand has a little bit of showdown value, and even though the solver would tell me that this is an optional bluff, not a mandatory one, I'm going to go ahead and bet that hand all of the time. I'm not going to mix because I believe the true EV of betting is higher than the true EV of checking based on the added fold equity that I have for playing against a capped human range. Let's dig into that a bit deeper. So already on the flop, I don't believe the solver in reality that my options check and bet have the same EV. I do actually think that with a non-nutted flush draw and a hand that has the ability to do really well on almost any turn card against what's possibly a weaker player, I think that the EV of check will be higher just based on the random turn leads that I face, the misplays my opponent's going to make later on in the game tree. That could be true, it could be false. I'm actually not super sure about that, but I do think that it's likely that either check or bet is better here. I don't know for sure that it's check that's better, but I'm leaning in that direction. That said, I'm not that bothered here. I'm okay with actually betting the flop if you want to here. I don't think it's like a mistake or anything, or if it is a mistake, it's very small. On the turn, when villain checks again, however, this is where, for the first time in the hand, I'm convinced that there's been a big swing in my true EV. Because the thing is, if you look this spot up in game theory, what you'll see is that your application, your solver, is going to get really trappy here with flushes. They're going to check a set here. They're going to check raise you a ton. They're going to check raise bluff you. Random weaker players, and again, this may not be one, but even the regs are guilty of this to some extent, but especially recreational players are going to fail badly to protect the checking range. They're going to lead too often with their queen X. They're going to lead too merged and even lead like a 9 sometimes. They're going to lead too many of their flush draws. They're going to lead too many of their sets, their flushes. What does that leave their checking range as? Something very weak. This massively incentivizes us to bet. So when a solver says, okay, bet 85% of the time with ace-jack with a jack of spades here, whatever it's going to say, or 60% of the time, I don't know, it's going to have some high bet frequency, but not pure, probably. Correct me if I'm wrong. You don't have to listen to that. You shouldn't be mixing. You should be figuring out whether bet is better than check, and here it definitely is. And here if you check, what's going to happen is that when you miss the river, villain is going to overbluff that node, they're going to lead like because you have such a bad hand when you miss the river, you can't call, but because the fold equity was so massive on the turn, you should take that there and then. Okay, if I have a hand like jacks with a spade, very different. I'm going to check back because I know turn is overfolded and I know they're going to overbluff the river. But in this node, I need to bet because I don't have jacks. I have a hand that's going to lose to some of their random river bets that they make. So we've got to be careful here. I hope that's useful for you guys, that you can see that even in a really common situation like this, true EV is worth thinking about and worth discovering and worth acting on. On to another spot. We all have dreams to be chilling in the sun, becoming the GOAT of online cash games. But how do we achieve such a dream? How do we get to the very top of the poker climbing frame? How do we avoid plummeting to the very bottom, or even roaming around eating off the ground? Well, one way we can do this, guys, is by getting really regular feedback and making sure that we're truly understanding the material that we're working our way through. The Carrot Poker School is great for this. It gives you feedback every step of the way. With every lecture, there comes a homework task with feedback by me, and also there's an exam per grade of the Carrot Poker School, which is 10 very meaty questions long, and we go into over an hour of me working in the solver, showing you why everything is the case, and giving you feedback on your answers. To my knowledge, there aren't many other poker courses out there, and there never have been, that give you this opportunity. Don't underestimate the importance of feedback. Yes, the Carrot Poker School has hours and hours of footage. It's very meaty, it's very academic, and that's why we make sure that we test you and let you test yourself every step of the way. To pick it up, head over to carrotcorner.com and you can save £500 by grabbing our full scholarship today and getting grade 1, grade 2 and grade 3 all at the same time. Hope you enjoy the material, and let's get back to the action. Okay, so we're button versus cutoff here with fours. The true EV of this hand is going to be very similar to the theoretical EV because I have a bunch of good players at the table, right? So there's really not going to be much of a difference here. In GTO, this is a tiny amount of 3-bet that's mostly fold. I'm not going to deviate here because while the true EV may be slightly different than the theoretical EV for 3-betting, I don't really care. It's going to be close enough that I can't tell. So just because, like, you know, there isn't the same amount of money in each box, it doesn't always mean that you can tell which box contains more money. 4-5, this is a spot where I think there is a deviation pre-flop. I think that although in theory I can 3-bet or I can call here, I'm pretty sure against a blue tag, again, that's someone who I think is a weaker player so far, may not be, but I think is. The EV of 3-bet is going to be lower than normal, the fold equity will be a bit less, and the EV of call will be higher than normal because my opponent's likely playing in a way that just makes that the case. On this turn, I'm actually going to make a giant overbet because I think the EV of probing here is higher than normal. You can also check raise this node, and I think the EV of check raise is okay as well. Maybe it's a little thin to check raise actually, but I think that you can. This is a very good card for my range. I do have Queen 10, I have King 10. I think the EV of bluffing here is going to be fine, potentially even higher than normal. And I'm going to go ahead and bluff the river every single time with this combo. Okay, so he river 2-pair and isn't folding that particular hand, but that's absolutely fine. I'm going to go over this hand again and show you what I mean here. To be clear, I don't know what kind of recreational player that is. I don't know if it's stationary, I don't know if it's tight, I'm not sure. I just know that it's not a regular, it's not someone that I've seen very much. So I'll explain this line. I think I have to open the King 7 first. I mean, I was going to just fold for the sake of going over that last hand, but this is going to be fairly break even in theory, and actually true EV is going to swing positive again here with a weaker player in the small blind. Okay, when I have a hand like this, it's again neutral in GTO whether I bet or whether I check, and I'll be using a big bet in this spot mostly. I am going to always bet this hand in reality against a weaker player, because what happens is that the turn leading range from them tends to be all over the place. It tends to be too many hands, right? So maybe we'll go over this hand first and then go back over the previous hand where we bluffed off a bunch of money, and I'll explain why we did that. So with the King 7 here, betting and checking are fine. You can bet, you don't have to. Most people would bet here intuitively. It's an instinctive thing to do, but you don't have to in theory terms. The reason I would always bet against a small blind player here in reality is that if I check, very often what's going to happen on the turn is that the turn will not be a diamond or a 7 or a king. And when it's none of those things, my opponent will play an erratic turn lead game. That means that when the turn is a 10, they will sometimes just lead out with pocket 8s instead of checking. And that's really bad for me, right? Or they will make a random bluff that they're never meant to make, like the turn is a queen and they decide to bet with ace 5. Well, actually ace 5 is fine, but let's say they decide to bet with ace 6 or something. And that can happen. Meanwhile, the flop will be overfolded and under-raised. Like what we generally see is that people don't defend optimally to c-bets. Okay, against the big c-bet on this board, maybe they do an okay job. But what's not going to happen enough is low EV bluff raises are not going to be a frequent enough guest in our opponent's ranges. So what we see on the flop here is that the true EV of betting has gone up the way, because we don't get raised enough, we don't get enough pressure applied to us. And the true EV of checking back has gone down a little bit because on average you face a turn probe a bit more frequently against a recreational player than you do against a good player or a solver on a board like this. So actually, the two lines are not equal. The true EV of one is higher than the other, and it's my job to figure out which one that is. This other hand I'm less sure about, but let's go back to it and check it out. So we have 4-5 here. You can mix in 3-bet bluff with this in game theory. As I said, I don't think I should, because the true EV of 3-betting is going to be lower than it is in game theory against most recreational players. Not all of them. There are tight ones that overfold to 3-bets or fold like a ton on the flop or something like that, or open way too wide and then fold a ton, or don't ever 4-bet you, and things like that. And against those guys, it might be okay to 3-bet, but by and large, it's going to be a mistake to 3-bet this hand pre against a random recreational, because the average fold equity is 10 to 15% lower against recreational players. That's just the way it goes when you're 3-betting them in this spot, and they're in position. So call is better than 3-bet pre-flop, and that's why we do that pure. We don't roll the dice. We don't decide to get tricky here or fancy or whatever. Ace-Jack Deuce is a board that they should bet a lot. When they don't bet, their range is going to be quite showdowny. They're going to have like middle pairs, they're going to have things like that. They're going to have top pair, they're going to have kings, they're going to have queens, they're going to have a gutter, they're going to have some under pair, sometimes they're even going to have air. When I lead this turn, I expect this bet to overperform relative to GTO. I actually expect check to underperform because I don't think they're going to give me a free river as often as they should. I think they're going to c-bet the turn too often with like a jack, too often with an ace. I don't think they're going to check the turn enough, and I don't think I'm going to get a free river card as often as I'm meant to in theory. So again, I think check actually goes down the way in EV on this turn for this hand. Again, I'm being very careful to examine what happens to the EV of both of my options and comparing that to what happens in game theory. When I 2x pot here, I think I'll get a bit more fold equity than I'm meant to get, probably, although it's not super clear to me, but I think the range should be a bit more capped and a bit weaker than usual. Should contain less top pair, more hands like kings, queens, more hands like jack X. I don't know whether this opponent or how often pool will fold a jack here or fold kings or queens. I suspect that sometimes, but not always. I don't think an ace will ever fold, but that's okay. Then by the river, there's a very realistic pattern here that too much of my opponent's range is stuff like ace 5, ace 6, queen jack, jack 10, pocket kings, pocket queens. Okay, some of these hands have now caught up to beat us. I don't think there'll be enough queen 10 in here. I don't think there'll be that much queen 10, like checking back flop and then calling turn. There'll be some, but I think it'll c-bet flop a lot. And I think there'll be way too many hands like ace 6, right? So if I think there's way too many hands like ace 6 here, going ahead and bombing river, because if I had a set, what I'm saying I've got here is jacks. What I'm saying I've got here is a set of 8s, a set of deuces, queen 10. That's basically my value range for the sizing. And the reason I go very large is that those hands would go very large, and it's just a sensible thing to do. The reason I bet this hand is that I think it's reasonable. It unblocks most of the ace X that's folding and jack X that's folding. It doesn't block any jack X, in fact, at all. It doesn't block queens, doesn't block that much of the folding range. It blocks ace 4, ace 5 of diamonds only. It's a couple of combos. It's not the end of the world. So yeah, I think this is a reasonable theoretical candidate, but I think in reality, my opponent's range will not contain ace king anywhere near often enough. It won't contain a straight as often as the GTO range will. And I'm not even sure that all of the combos of 8s will be there, because people actually don't know that they shouldn't raise the turn with a set there, even though it's disastrous. Some recreational players will. So I think overall, this river bluff is fine in theory, and I expect it to overperform a bit in practice. I expect the fold equity that I get here to be 75%, something like that. And of course, maybe 70%. And of course, it only needs to be 64, 65% before I'm breaking even with this bet relative to checking, which is of course worth nothing. So that's how I think about true EV in this spot. And that's why I go for this bluff. And I think the bluff is good. If I do run into a total station here and I get snapped by one pair, then I learn that that's not the player to do this against. But yeah, it's a fallacy that recreational players are just all stations. Many of them are actually overfolding these notes. All right, let's see what else comes up. It's fascinating, right? That even the most mundane kind of spots can be thought about in this way. You can do a true EV comparison and try and figure out what's really going on. I was teaching a guy this morning that plays in the New Jersey pool, and we talked a little bit about how good that was for him, and that pool's great and blah, blah, blah. So this is, let me just play this hand, I'll come back to the story. This is hijack versus big blind. I don't think I'm going to deviate on this node. I'm going to continue my story and just fold here. I could throw in a little bit of 4-bet, but it's in these positions, it shouldn't really be much. Call is a little too loose there. And he was sort of showing me his graph. He's done incredibly well in that pool, winning at like 7 BB per 100, no joke, over like 170k hands, I believe it was. Ace 9 is just going to be a call here. I am going to build leads on this texture. Do I want this hand to be in that leading range? How do I think people will react to a lead here? I'm not sure. This hand is incredibly mediocre. If there's a hand that doesn't lead, it's probably this one. So then on the turn, the true EV of check is, well, theoretical EV of check is much higher than bet, and that will be the case in reality as well, because bet here makes absolutely no sense. You're betting the middle of your range. There's no reason that you should do that. I think this spot will be overbluffed, and so I'm going to make a looser call than normal. Do I think this spot will be overbluffed? I don't know. I think this hand is like super close anyway. Like, I think it's pretty much break even, and I would lean towards it being slightly overbluffed. So I'm going to call like a good ace high here. The river is a little bit different. Overbet is the right size for villain to use. He's basically saying I have a value hand. And again, because this is button and because villain check flop, I think overbluffing is going on here, and I'm going to click call. And I'll go over this hand as well. I think this is a classic overbluff spot, and I don't want to give away all the secrets of Grady of the Carrot Poker School, but this one I'm going to give to you guys as a treat. This is a real treat, right, when you hear my explanation for this. This is something that a lot of people would pay a ton of money for, and indeed if you do that course, obviously that's underway now, it's too late to sign up. But that course is all about covering hundreds of spots and learning the secrets, but I'm going to go over the secret in this one spot for you as a treat and give you a real trick of the trade in this situation that leads me to make that call. And on the turn and on the river as well. Let's pull up the replayer and let's talk about this one. I'll finish my story first. So the student is doing really well, and he's not that strong a theoretician. His theory is actually, by his own admission, fairly weak. He's got some idea of it, right? He has some good basic instincts, but he's not a very studious player. He's not studied like a ton of theory. And in having not studied a ton of theory, he has tons of gaps, like tons of leaks in his game, but he's crushing. Why is he crushing? Because he understands what his opponents are doing, the way they're playing, and he understands which of his options has the highest true EV in lots of situations. Just like here against a random reg. I don't know this player, I'm not making reads on V-Card Killer specifically, but I believe this spot to be very overbluffed in the general population. So I start with my baseline EV, which is that, okay, I could lead flop, I could not, I don't really care. I check, villain goes for c-bet, delayed c-bet, and I think the spot's overbluffed. So I start there. Why do I think this spot's overbluffed? There's a few reasons. One, if my opponent's not really strong, and he may be really strong, I don't know, but a lot of regs aren't really strong, despite the fact this is 200 Zoom on a Wednesday morning. If he's not really strong, he's probably not building enough overpair sets, slow plays into the checking range. It's just like greedy. It's natural to get greedy here with a set that's now become a boat and bet the flop. So I don't think there'll be enough sets in the checking range on average. Again, maybe this guy does protect enough, I don't know. This is a spot he should be checking a ton on the flop. So it's very easy for this range to be too full of just random cards and bluffs on the turn here. Very, very easy. Then we come to the river. I check in villain quickly overbets. The timing was very fast here. I'm not one for making up reads where there aren't any, but let me give you my thoughts on this timing in this line. So first off, the secret, the trick of the trade, the thing that's going to make you rich. When flop has been checked back, usually humans are not doing as good of a job as a solver is of maintaining a sufficiently strong checking range, putting slow plays into that range, overpair sets, etc. Also, they're not incredibly good at waiting to value bet, so they just value bet right away. It's kind of the same point. Another thing is that people like to bluff when they don't have showdown value, and they're not that aware of what the give-ups are, like what hands have bad blockers for betting. King Queen is an example of a hand that has very bad blockers for betting the river, because what does villain block? What calling hands does he block in my range with this hand? King 6, King 7, Queen 7, Queen 6, okay, maybe some. But he also blocks like the king high and queen high hands that I maybe call turn with. Maybe this one isn't so bad, right? It'd be worse if you had like a diamond. But I don't think this is a fantastic bluffing hand. Maybe it's not bad actually. It unblocks ace jack, ace 10 as well. I don't have ace queen, ace king. Maybe this hand's okay to bluff with. But the point is that if you check back king queen on the flop, blocks, but don't check all of your good hands, then bet the turn with it willy-nilly, like just bet the turn every time and then bet the river just really quickly and automatically. Maybe he just knows his GTO, he knows this is a bluff. But most humans overbluff this spot because they take way too much of their air and play it this way, while playing their value hands a different way, like usually betting flop, possibly even with a value hand, you know, they're thinking a bit more on the river here to be able to snap overbet this river. Okay, if you have aces, sure, you can do that. But I think I'd be thinking about like 3x pot, and 2x pot, and 4x pot and jam and things like this, right? If I've got like a 4, I've got aces, I've got kings, etc. So sometimes, not always, the quick bet on the river can very often be overbluffed. It's just a pattern I've observed that when it's a natural bluff opportunity and people bet really quickly, it's quite often overbluffed in large portions of the pool. But the main secret here is check, bet, bet is an overbluffed line, especially against wide ranges. I'll leave you with that thought. So when ranges start off wide. This is absolute gold, by the way, what I've just told you there. Don't go telling that to people. I can already imagine certain students I've taught being mad that I've even like said this in a YouTube video, but that pattern will make you a lot of money, trust me. Check, bet, bet is a line you want to bluff catch against very aggressively. So I have no qualms about calling ace-9 here. I don't care what I have, as long as I beat all of villain's bluffs. And unless villain is an absolute whale, then I do beat all of their bluffs because they're not bluffing ace-10 or ace-jack. That's completely absurd. Then I have no problem calling. You can give me any hand here. You can give me threes, you can give me ace-9, you can give me ace-5. I don't really care if I've got ace-high on this node, or better. I'm very tempted to just pure call because I think the true EV of call is higher than the EV of fold. So right, let's do one more spot. Let's try and generate another really cool spot to talk about, then we're going to wrap up this video. I don't want to give any more away. This has already been like an insanely valuable pattern. People are going to be mad at me. Students are going to be mad, like, Pete, stop giving away these secrets. I've paid to do these courses that you're running, and they give away these secrets. Why are you giving YouTube the secrets? Because I love my YouTube audience. They're important to the growth of my business. Gotta give you little treats every now and then. That is a little treat. Check, bet, bet. Super overbluffed, remember that one. Not always. There are other times when it's not. I won't say any more, but there are times when it's not. But most of the time, if in doubt, you want to call against that line. 8-6 against min, I actually have no idea. I suspect this is just a fold. I suspect it could be a call. It wouldn't shock me if it was a call. I don't know. There's a gap in my preflop right there, guys. I do not know whether that's a call against min. If I was a turning player, I would know. So 10-3 is just outside. It's losing. Against 20 big blinds, I think it's more losing because you get shoved on. Like, a lot of the time that player's tilted. They pick up ace-5 and they jam. Like ace-5 off and they jam. You face jam a lot against 20 BB stacks, so 10-3 isn't an open anyway. But there'll be a lot of hands that are on the fringe there that you don't want to open against 20 big blind stack because they swing negative in true EV. Again, it's all about true EV today. Let's make this queen jack a good one. I'm gonna make this the final instructive hand of the video. I hope this player opens so I can talk exploitatively. They don't, but that's okay. Okay, so we get cold called and we get squeezed. And this is going to be very break even this hand. I believe it's just about going to be a pure call, but I think it'll be super close to 0. But the reason I'm going to always call here is, one, it would be shit viewing for you guys if I folded, but secondly, I think TT Chris 95 could well be a weaker player. I mean, he's got his birth date and his first name in his name. How can he not be? But on a serious note, most people who cold call cutoff versus button are recreational players, so the EV of this hand now swings slightly positive due to his implied presence in the pot. Unfortunately, this is now a fold. He cannot defend random backdoor undercards in this configuration, in this spot, to half pot, so we're out of there. But the pre-flop swing is where our true EV recognition skills come in. I'm going to set out next big blind, and if a spot comes up, it comes up, and if not, we will edit out the rest of this video. Okay, pocket threes, final hand. We have a min open from this same player who I think is recreational. This hand is a call in GTO, I believe, all of the time, and it's an even better call in reality. So while I'm not deviating here, I'm taking the same line as I would take in theory. I do expect the boost in the EV of this line in terms of true EV. I would never build a donk range. I'm not considering the possibility. Donking is equally bad, I would think, in reality here. On the turn, I want to be a bit selective about what I bluff on this node. I think threes has just not quite got enough redraw equity to do anything here. This spot will probably be played similarly in terms of range strength to in theory, so I think very clearly going to be a fold. And yeah, I hope as we watch the conclusion of this hand, I hope you guys have enjoyed this as a sneak peek into what you should truly be doing to figure out how to make the most profitable play. You should be thinking about the real life EV of your options from a theoretical baseline. Ah, snowmen, how can we resist? Last hand, guys. Unless it's just going to give me a million free hands. And we're going to decide is one line better than the other, and if so, we're going to take that line. Obviously, eights, opening is better than usual because we have a weaker player in the big blind, but it's not a deviation because we open that hand in on any table at all. So that's what we do. A few exploits that came up today, some bluffing, some bluff catching. But as long as I remember to think about true EV, I can avoid the trap of becoming a solver monkey and copying solver outputs and mixing in spots where one thing is better than another and deferring to chance the decision about how to make the most money. I shouldn't do that. I should investigate what's best. Always do what's best and do what's best 100% of the time. Not 50, not 60, not 70. Don't do it often, do it always. Do what's best. Investigate true EV. It'll save you a lot of money. It'll save your career. See you next time. Bye bye.